Hello and welcome to PawTube, a PawzNRead initiative to drive awareness about canine health and well-being. Joining me on today's PawTube is Alison Rigley, Head of Relocations at the Pet Relocations, part of the Pet Shop LLC. And Alison is going to help us understand the ABC of pet relocation, basically everything that we need to know when we are traveling with our pets, which is so important. Welcome to PawTube, Alison. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. It's an absolute pleasure. And before getting into the logistics, paperwork, and so on, I'd really like to start with your thoughts on the importance of actually, in the first place, evaluating whether our pets, our dogs, are actually ready for the move, whether they take it physically.
Yeah. No, absolutely. That's a really valid point, especially now because so many people want to take their dogs on holiday and their cats on holiday. Since Etihad have started to allow pets in the cabin, one of the most frequent inquiries that we get is, can I take my dog or cat on holiday? So I do always tell my clients straight away, it is quite a lot of stress on the animal. So if, for example, your dog's a happy-go-lucky dog, probably they'll be absolutely fine and they won't be so, I don't want to say traumatized, but so shocked by the experience. But if you do have a nervous, anxious pet, then probably it's not, the best for a holiday to take your pet with you for, 1 month or 2 months. However, if you're, leaving for good, then of course you have to take them. So then we have to just prepare them for that trip as well as we can in advance.
Absolutely. Alison, would you also be able to touch upon how important is it, to factor in the age of your pet? Also the distance. You pointed towards a very important fact that, taking pets on holidays for a month or even a couple of months needs to be well thought out. And all depends on the nature of the pet. But of course, moving countries is quite another thing. And that requires a fair amount of preparation.
Yeah. So the age of the pet, of course, it's a factor if you've got an older animal, but as long as they're fit and healthy, then there's no reason why they shouldn't travel. Anyone that is worried that their pet's, too old to travel, you can just get the vet to check. Make sure they are actually healthy. If the vet has no concerns, then go for it. There's no reason why not, just because they're old. Older animals are generally a lot more chilled. You do get the older anxious ones, but the old ones that just sleep all the time and chilled, well, they're probably just going to sleep the whole way there anyway. So no worries at all. We have sent older pets. We sent an older dog, I can't remember the exact age, maybe around 10, to Ecuador. So that was a really long flight. Yes. I think in total it was 4 flights to get them home. So, wow. So that was quite a trip, but the dog absolutely fine and arrived like nothing had happened. Also, we've sent a cat that was, I think it was either 20 or 21 years old, I can't remember now, to Spain. So that's about a 7-hour flight. And the owner said, no problem, just slept all the way, perfect.
I love these stories. I absolutely love these stories.
Yeah. So definitely. And we are getting inquiries every day for pets that are, 10, 12 years old to travel. So it's definitely, people are now less focused on the age of the pet. The distance, again, I always tell my clients, it's just one bad day. So it's not going to be the best day of their pet's life, but it's just one bad day. So we have quite a lot of Brazilian clients That's obviously quite a long flight. And also America, depending on where in America you're going to, is also quite a long flight. But yeah, the most stressful part for the animal is the loading, the takeoff, and then the landing and the unloading. So the time in between isn't such a huge factor.
Well, that's very reassuring, you know.
Yeah.
And on that note, I'll move on to the required paperwork when moving into the UAE as well as moving out of the UAE.
Okay, so let's talk about coming in first. Okay, so coming in, it depends on which country you're traveling from. Okay. So we have two categories, high risk and low risk. Okay. So these are based on rabies. So rabies, high risk, rabies, low risk. For example, the UK is a very easy example because we have many animals coming from the UK. And then a high risk would be Malaysia. There's a list, there's a published list that I can share with you. And basically you just need to check that to see where you're from. So if you're coming from a high risk, you just have to have an additional blood test, the rabies titer test. Okay. Other than that, it's vaccinations and then parasite treatments and health certificates before flying. All animals that enter have to have an import permit. And then they go through on arrival customs, and then they have the customs release. So basically, to summarize, blood tests may be high or low risk, health certificates, parasite treatments, and then, yeah, of course, the vaccinations and the microchip, they're given well in advance of traveling. So yeah, it's actually not so difficult to do that anymore. Like most vets offer these services, so it's quite good. The health certificates have to be completed by an approved vet, a ministry government vet or an authorized vet. Okay. Not always a regular vet. So normally they have a special round stamp, which means that they're approved to do travel documents.
That's very helpful. That's really helpful to know. How many days in advance do we have to, keep all these documents ready and in place when we're thinking of relocating a pet?
So the import permit is valid for 30 days. So once the client decides, okay, I'm going to fly on the 29th, then we can schedule everything accordingly for the health checks and the export papers. So the import permit, I normally apply for a couple of weeks before they arrive, just to give them a little bit of wiggle room in case their flight is delayed. Okay. And then the health checks, they're done in the days prior to departure. So a lot of countries just do them the day before they fly. Often that's because of logistics. People don't live so close to the airport. So when you're using a company, they will often pick them up the day before, take them to the vet, do all the documents, and then keep them for one night prior to flying. And then in the morning, they then check in for their flight. So the actual travel documents are done very close to departure, but the vaccinations and the microchip, they're done, well, they should always be valid. So they should always be ready to go.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And now, obviously, the response to this question is going to be a little lengthy because we're talking about regulations. And from what I understand, regulations change from time to time.
Time to time, yeah.
And particularly since the pandemic. But
exactly.
When we're looking at more popular destinations from the UAE, such as the US, Canada, the UK, parts of Europe, perhaps even Singapore, Australia, and India. What are the kind of regulations that pet parents must bear in mind?
Well, those countries are all quite different. So I can't really answer this as one answer because, for example, America, for the dogs, you have to get an import permit, which you have to apply for at least 3 months before flying.
Okay.
So this is something that started about a year ago now for the dogs to fly to America. They have to also have a blood test now, the titer test. Same like what dogs and cats have to fly to the UAE from a high-risk country. The same goes for America and for Australia and a few other, Singapore as well, a few other countries that you mentioned. So this is a really difficult question to answer just as a single. You'd have to break each country down. So really, you just always need to be thinking at least 3 months in advance. But in cases of Australia, you need to be planning 6 months in advance.
Okay.
So yeah, for
also,
the UK, you can travel. Oh, sorry.
No, please go ahead.
Okay, for the UK, India, Canada, you can travel to these countries with quite short notice. Most of Europe, quite short notice. But yeah, Singapore, also, they have to do a month's quarantine on arrival in Singapore. And that quarantine is actually booked up at least 6 months in advance. So this is a problem that we do have with a lot of Singapore relocations, is that the cat often, or the dog has to fly a few months after the client, because not many companies give you 6 months notice of a relocation. So yeah, there are challenges, but there's always solutions as well.
Absolutely. And when we're talking about the US, there are only some airports where your dogs and cats and other pets can fly into, right? When relocating, or can they fly into every airport?
Not every airport. There is a list published. To be honest, it's quite a comprehensive list, and it's most of the international big airports. So that's not really an issue. This is for the dogs we're talking about. For the cats, there's no issue. They can fly. As long as the airline flies there, then they can fly. I don't know of any airports that cats cannot fly to in America. But yeah, even for the dogs, the list is quite comprehensive, and it's all the main airports anyway that you would use. They've just started a quarantine for the dogs that are not compliant to travel. And there's a list, I think it's 4 or 5, is it 4 or 5? The America quarantine. Do you think 6? So it's 4, 5 or 6 airports. They've changed them recently, yeah. So Atlanta, LA, I think, and basically these are for the people that have to we're leaving next month, we have to travel, we don't have time for the run up. So these need to book them in advance, these kennels for the quarantine, and they don't have any information available to us at the moment as to how long the wait is to get a booking, because it's a new thing. There isn't even a published list, I don't think, of the kennels yet, although that might have been updated on the website recently. So yeah, just always issues to overcome, but yeah, there's always solutions.
And why it's always important to pre-plan, and
exactly,
keep some time in hand, and again, when it comes to planning, a very important thing is to sort of very mindfully keep aside a budget for pet relocation. That's extremely important, I think. That pet parents should consider the moment they bring a pet through the doors.
Exactly.
And it's always, Alison, it's always a choice. Pet parents can choose to sort of handle this entire relocation process on their own, but I feel as if it's a tad bit stressful.
Of course.
And you can when you sort of collaborate with an expert, that's the whole experience becomes a little less stressful for pet parents.
Exactly. So yeah.
So I mean, when budgeting for pet relocation, what kind of cost estimation should pet parents keep in mind?
It completely depends where you're going and what animals you have. I can't just pick out a number, because for every client, quotation is tailored to them. If, for example, you have a cat and you're going to England, depending on where in England, you should budget around 6,500 to 8,500 dirhams.
Okay.
If you have a dog and you're going to Australia, you should budget for a small dog around 20,000. And then depending on the size of the dog, the prices increase for the flight. So it could easily be 20 to 30,000 dirhams plus. And that's for one. If you have multiple, then of course it will increase with everything. So yeah.
Australia is flying your pets into Australia the most expensive of most countries, you know, including the US, UK, India. Is Australia the most expensive?
Australia is, I would say, because they have the quarantine for 10 days. The import permit and the quarantine for one pet, it's around 10,000 dirhams just for that alone.
Okay.
So yeah, so then if you're then flying on to another state, because there's only one quarantine in the whole of Australia, you then need to add on accordingly to that for the additional flight if needed to, you know, Brisbane or Perth or something like that. So there is also a lot of blood tests that need to be done. So yeah, basically it is a very expensive place to go. There are other countries that have quarantine as well. Singapore, oh, there's many, New Zealand, South Africa, there's many countries that have a quarantine, but to my knowledge, Australia is the most expensive of the quarantine stations. Yeah.
Okay. Any preferred airlines, Alison, that you always like to suggest to pet parents, or you work?
To be honest, I used to have preferred airlines. Now I just take whatever I can get.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't have a lot of choice. So obviously we always try and get the most direct option. So depending on the breed of your pet, will determine which airline and which route. Okay. Emirates do not accept any snub-nosed animals. So no Persian cats, no. Yes, exactly. Okay. So no pugs or Persians, you know, anything with a flat face, Emirates won't accept. And this is a country where we have many Persians and Persian mixes.
Yes, so, as well as Frenchies, and then
exactly
Mastiffs of the world, pugs.
Yeah, I mean the Mastiffs, because they are mostly banned here, we don't actually get to ship that many. If you have a Mastiff, depending on the airline, they may need a different travel box as well, like a reinforced travel box. So that's a whole other conversation to have. But my airlines of choice is normally Emirates or Etihad. And then we also use KLM, Lufthansa, Singapore, quite a bit. Basically, depending on the location and the breed of the pet, we then select accordingly the best option.
All right. And you mentioned something very important, direct flights. So, yeah. So as somebody who's an expert in pet relocations now, you do think that direct flights are better as opposed to, sort of breaking the journey up, if that's possible?
Yes, absolutely. One takeoff, one landing, one loading, one unloading. It's much better just to try and get it out. Then hopefully the animal just settles and sleeps, you know, all the journey. There is, with the snub nose, like the Frenchies, some like to have a break halfway. So you really have to weigh it up. If it's for example, 10-hour direct flight, but then indirect, it's going to be 6 hours and then another 6 hours plus a break, then sometimes I think it's just better just to get them there as quickly as you can. So yeah, you talk to the client, understand the personality of their pet, discuss with them what they want, and then you can then choose. But like I say, to be honest, normally now we just take whatever we can get. So it's not like before where we had many options for, oh, let's do it this way or this way. Normally it's like, okay, no, this is the only option for you. Hope you like it. So yeah.
And my last question to you, Alison, what would be your top 3 tips to pet parents, those who are planning to sort of relocate their pets with them?
Okay, I was talking to my colleagues earlier on, asking what their opinion was as well. So we said crate training is very important, especially if you have an anxious dog or a nervous pet. There's lots of videos online how to do it, but the more training you do, the better your pet will feel inside the travel box. A lot of animals are crate trained anyway, so brilliant. They already are quite happy in there, but that's just something that's really helpful. Just, you know, you make it their day and their home, and then when they travel, they just think, oh, we're going, you know, on a trip. It's fine. We mentioned earlier on about using an agent or not using an agent. So it's like you can go to a restaurant or you can cook at home, you know, and we all have different budgets. So if you are planning to do it yourself, you need to be really organized and know what you're doing. Yeah, you don't want to have any last minute surprises. So, you know, anyone that does it themselves, great, full respect, like it's not easy and it's a lot of stress. When you're leaving the country, you've got 20 million things going on. You've got to cancel your DWA, phone, you know, internet, even seeing friends as you're leaving. You've got so many things to do that adding the extra stress of the animal on top of that, if you don't know what you're doing, could be a disaster. So yes, if you're in any doubt, better just to use an agent. Yes, it's more expensive, but also we do know how to save money as well. So you might be planning to do it in the most expensive way, and I can say, no, you're doing it all wrong. You should be doing it this way. So
yes, absolutely. And I think it saves, as you said, as we discussed earlier, it saves you that kind of stress. You're already stressed. I mean, somebody like me, I would freak out if I had to sort of, I mean, just the thought of getting my boy on the plane. I mean, I would definitely align with an expert. As opposed to going through all the groundwork, but nothing wrong with that. It's just that there's a lot of research involved and getting everything right, from the crate to the calming spray and everything else, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes when the airlines are talking to normal people doing it themselves, they use the same terminology as what they're using with the agents, and often the normal people doing it themselves can get confused and misunderstand the information. They think a flight is booked, but actually it's not booked. They just made an inquiry. They think that their pet's crate, because it's a 4 kilo cat and a 4 kilo box, they think they're going to get charged for 8 kilos, whereas actually no, it's much more than that. It's the volume of the box, or depending if they're excess baggage. This conversation we could have for hours and hours, but yes, it's just be prepared, basically know your stuff and get organized. The final tip is empty tummy. So when pets fly, you want them not to have a meal for around 6 hours before, just because they might go to the toilet. I mean, that's not an issue. If they go to the toilet, they go to the toilet. But if they might feel a bit more sick from the travel, motion sickness and these things. So lots of animals, if you just do the fasting before, then you're just removing that element of added nausea to the pet. Unless it's puppies and kittens, they still need to eat regularly because they can't fast for a long time. But yeah, fasting for adult animals is a good tip as well.
Sure, sure. And of course, throwing in your used clothes, a t-shirt or something to just calm them down, or their favorite toy, anything that will sort of help them calm down during their journey, I guess.
Well, I mean, that's part of the crate training. You put something in there that's familiar for them. You don't put toys because they're a choking hazard. So there shouldn't be any toys in the travel box, just a thin bed or blanket, something absorbent to collect any toilet that might happen. But yeah, normally if you're training them in advance, the bed will already smell familiar. But yes, you can add, I always feel like an old pillowcase or an old t-shirt as well. No harm.
All right. Thank you so much, Alison, for joining me
You're
and
welcome.
sharing some really important information. What I'm going to do is, because these processes are so lengthy, it's very difficult to have this conversation in 20-30 minutes. I'm
exactly.
For our audience and for our viewers, I'm going to touch base with you again and probably gather those list of things and put it together in an article.
Yeah, I mean, basically, this is why every client is treated individually, because it depends on your location, what pets you have, how, when, why, how much notice you have. There's just so many variables into each relocation. So yeah, anyone that has any questions, they can always send me an email, and then we can tell you, maybe you have two options or for how to relocate. We can tell you them and then explain to you the pros and cons.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much once again, Alison. It's been
You're welcome.
Good to have you on PawTube.
You're most welcome. Thank you so much. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye.